With 3 years since announcement, a host of fake lore, multiple teasers and trailers, a widely played network test, the involvement of world-famous fantasy author George R.R. Martin, not one but 2 most anticipated Game of the Year awards, and the expectations of being the spiritual successor to one of the most popular franchises of the last decade, Elden Ring is a primo candidate to be overhyped. Now, that might be dangerous to say. Even as an obvious FromSoft fan, I could easily gain quite the ire for such a suggestion, considering Souls fans might be a bit too in love with From Software. But in a world with dumpster fire releases like No Man's Sky, and even recent poor releases like Halo Infinite, Battlefield 2042, and of course Cyberpunk 2077, it never hurts to take a second to reconsider whether the hype and expectations for a game are fully merited. Now, we need a definition for overhyped if we're going to have a discussion about it. If hype is the mix of fan expectations and company marketing before a game releases, then a game would be overhyped if these expectations, anticipations, and marketing material don't match up with the actual content of the game when it's released. A game is overhyped if the hype, that is the expectations and marketing, is too great for the game itself, or said in a more common way, if the game doesn't live up to the hype. Elden Ring certainly does have quite the share of fan expectations and exciting marketing. The list I stated at the start of the video highlights that. From acclaimed Game of Thrones author to beautiful cinematic trailers to multiple anticipation awards to fans creating rich and complex fake lore before any information about the game actually released, the hype train for Elden Ring is full steam ahead. Plus, there are content creators singing the game's praises. But here we run into a nuance in the discussion of Elden Ring hype. The hype train may be full speed, but for overhype to be achieved, this excitement has to be, to some degree, unwarranted. But important to note, content creator comments on the game, and even some of the hype I mentioned before, are not solely made from expectations and marketing. Some of it is made from time spent with the game. If the actual game content is the cause of hype, then it is categorically harder for there to be overhype, the mismatch of game content and fan excitement. If fans are excited about what they actually see in the actual game, there's not really overhype going on because that's what the actual game is. Content creators that have more alive channels than me have been playing the final build of the game, and thousands of people played a vertical slice of the game in the network test at the end of last year. Now, there are some complications here. Content creators can be, implicitly or explicitly, incentivized to give positive reviews in exchange for the exclusive access to the game they receive. And the network test only shows off a curated vertical slice of the game that developers can tailor to give a better experience than the entire game might be able to. So, there is reason to believe the hype is justified, as some of it comes from the game itself, but there's also reason to be a tad skeptical of some of the pre-release discourse. As I see it, this leads us to the developers themselves, From Software. To help us tell whether this pre-release content is a trustworthy source when it comes to assessing the actual game, taking a look at the reputation and history of the developing company can be illuminating. In the other examples of overhype that I mentioned, there was reason to fear overhype given the status of the developers. The Halo series has been on rough ground really ever since 343 took the helm, with any successes being weighed down by pretty glaring issues, whether that be the blandness of Halo 4 or the story train wreck that was Halo 5. Essentially, every single recent Battlefield has been chiefly characterized by a mess of a launch that sometimes takes years to remedy, though the lack of new content and development misdirection of 2042 may be too great even for the usual DICE post-launch fixer-upper. And while CD Projekt Red had a massive success with The Witcher 3, becoming Poland's highest valued company, its history of smaller successes in Witcher 1 and 2, plus the extremely different styles of the third-person Witcher series versus the first-person Cyberpunk setting, did not provide evidence that the company had the skills to deliver a wildly impressive Cyberpunk game, which was basically what the hype for the game was. And, of course, No Man's Sky was made by an indie dev team that had a single-digit staff. Not to mention, the only game they had developed previously was the Joe Danger series. So there wasn't a lot of reason to think that that dev team could deliver what the expectations and hype for No Man's Sky were setting up to be. These examples of developers with so-so histories illustrate how hype can shroud past performance and mislead reasonable expectations. But this isn't really the case with From Software. Since Demon's Souls' release in 2009, From Software has put out an impressive list of games that speak to their ability to consistently develop quality gaming experiences of a certain type. Dark Souls 1, 2, 3, Bloodborne, and Sekiro all rank highly both in critical and general audience reviews. Yes, even Dark Souls 2 as well. There are multiple video game classics in their catalog, and essentially all of these games build on pretty similar gameplay and thematic elements. Whereas CD Projekt Red shifted from third-person fantasy to first-person shooter/cyberpunk, From Software have diligently honed their craft in making games that stand in their own genre, one that they essentially created. From Software has shown that they're really good at making Souls-like games, and Elden Ring, for better or for worse, seems pretty Souls-like. So in assessing Elden Ring, we look to this history and compare it with what kind of game Elden Ring is and is being presented as. And Elden Ring is being presented as essentially big Dark Souls. So From Software's history of creating fantastic Souls-like games serves as pretty good evidence that they are good at iterating on this kind of game. With this in mind, it seems apparent to me that we have good reason to think the pre-release content of Elden Ring is a decently fair source to learn and draw conclusions about the actual game. And if that is the case, then what I said earlier probably obtains. That the actual game content is one of the main causes for a lot of the hype. So it is categorically harder for there to be overhype. With the decent amount of game content we've seen, both critically and publicly, and the decade-plus evidence of From Software successfully making games like this game, I think it is a fair conclusion to make that Elden Ring is not overhyped. And there's the answer to the question in the video title, and yes, unsurprisingly, it follows Betteridge's Law. Obviously, people who are fangasming about the perfect holiness of FromSoft and those that think this game will single-handedly cure all of life's woes, or at least all of gaming's woes, are probably putting too much stock in it. But the general attitudes of great expectations for the game seem to be decently justified. And this video is releasing with less than a week until the game's release, so we'll know the actual answer soon enough. It might seem like it kind of defeats the purpose of the question to ask it so soon before the game comes out, but I figure this gave a good enough avenue to talk about an interesting topic, whether or not the hype we give to something like a video game is appropriate. So I'm okay with the little time it might be superficially relevant. The question of overhype ties into our relationship with games as products and as works of art, and discussing that is more important to me than actually answering the question of whether this one specific game is overhyped or not. I'm sure in the future there will be games that gamers get way too excited about, get overhyped, and then get disappointed with the releases. That's going to happen regardless of whether or not videos like this are there to be tools to get a better idea of when something should be hyped, when something might be overhyped or not. I think it's just going to keep happening because gamers are gamers. But it is still very interesting whether or not a game that I'm very excited about is worth getting so excited over. Obviously, that has some bearing on me and anyone else who has invested heavily into the game, which is probably most of you watching this video or people watching my channel. There's a decent chance you're pretty into the Soulsborne Akira series if you're watching my stuff, since a lot of the stuff that I've made that's been popular has been Souls content. Well, the main question of the video is answered, but if you feel like sticking around to listen to my ramblings on how this all relates to our relationship with games as art, feel free to. As we get really excited for the game to release, we are heavily interacting with it as a product. We are excited to get this new shiny toy to play with and enjoy. We take some time off work or cancel plans or block out time just to enjoy this thing, especially right when it comes out. Is this commodification something that prevents the game from being a work of art? Can a work of art also be such a mass-produced and marketed product? Or what's the importance of playing with or enjoying the game right when it releases as opposed to 6 months after or a year after? Part of it is surely that we want to play it and enjoy it as soon as possible. We're excited about this new thing, and when it's out, we're going to play it. But there's also an element of it being a game and a multiplayer game that there's an element of community and playing with people, and because there's PvP, summoning, and fighting bosses with other people, it's important to play it when it's most active so you get that whole experience with all the other people and the other covenants and factions and interactions with those. And that's not something that we're going to get with a lot of other works of art, like movies or music. You can enjoy them with people, but it's with people in, I don't want to say a more superficial way, but a less categorically important way, because part of the core of the game for a game like Elden Ring or the Soulsborne series more broadly, other than Sekiro, is that community aspect of playing the game with other people, so other people are online with you, and discovering things with the community, because that's historically how the lore and story and deeper meanings of these kinds of games get revealed. It's people interacting and talking about the stuff going on in here, which to some degree is something that can happen with music and movies, discussion afterwards, but it's just not as categorically important of a thing as with a game that has a multiplayer feature. And the question of whether a work of art can be such a mass-produced and mass-marketed thing is a question that comes up somewhat, but not as much with these other kinds of art that I've been talking about, like great albums and films. Sure, plenty of extremely popular and mass-marketed pop music and blockbusters might seem more product than art, but plenty of genuine work of art albums and kino films get lots of marketing. People get excited about their releases and may block out special time just to experience them, in the exact same way as with a game. As I said, the importance of experiencing it right when it comes out might not be as important as with a multiplayer game, but people still interact with it in a similar way in terms of blocking out time and wanting to see it as early as they can, wanting to see a cool movie on opening night. Games don't have the same social prestige as great films or music, but the experience people have with them in this way, or how they interact with them in terms of excitement before release, or hype if you will, are pretty similar. And I think that's basically it in terms of ramblings. Most of that was not as scripted as the rest of the video. The rest of the video I had a very explicit script, and this is more bullets. But I thought it was interesting to talk about, and games as art is something that's very important to me as well, so a little avenue to explore that, to explore the community around games, especially for games like Dark Souls or the Souls series, Elden Ring, FromSoft games, is pretty cool and important, and especially in my interaction with the games, like the last game that I played very intensely of the Soulsborne series was Dark Souls 3, and a lot of that experience was interacting with people on Reddit and online to discuss the different things about the game, and make videos and have people comment on the videos and all that discussion going on. So it's a very important aspect to me, and I'm excited for it in Elden Ring, and that all builds into the kind of hype equation in question as well. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to see Elden Ring lore and all that Gucci Elden Ring content, I'm going to be posting it, so stick around. Bye.